Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the narrow lanes of a medieval town, the cobbles damp beneath your shoes, the air tinged with wood smoke, and the faint yeasty breath of old bread. You're not here for feasts in great halls, no gilded banquets, no silver chalices. You're here with the ordinary folk, the ones who clutch yesterday's crust and somehow turn it into today's snack. And you probably won't survive this. At least not if you tried to live on nothing but scraps of stale loaves and pinches of salt, the medieval equivalent of gas station chips. Still, it's surprisingly filling, and in its way, comforting. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, if you're listening, drop a comment with where you are in the world and what time it is as you drift into this story. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The bread you imagine isn't fluffy and fresh like your modern loaf. It's dense, heavy, more brick than pillow. Town bakers churn out rounds baked in communal ovens, where wealthy households and humble tenants alike carry their dough to be finished. When loaves go stale, hard enough to chip a tooth, the answer isn't to throw them away. Instead, the trick is to cut, soften with broth, or simply grind them into crumbs to sprinkle with salt. Think of it as medieval croutons, minus the Caesar salad. Salt, meanwhile, is not just seasoning, it's wealth in crystal form. For the common laborer, a pinch is a prize, turning dry bread into something sharp and addictive. The crunch of a salted crust becomes a pleasure so simple it almost feels guilty. Historians still argue whether these everyday snacks counted as meals in their own right, or if they were more like filler between long workdays. Either way, they lingered at the edge of hunger and satisfaction. The kind of bite you take not because it's glamorous, but because your body says, "This will do." Picture yourself standing in a market square. A woman leans over a basket of hardened rolls, hawking them at a fraction of yesterday's price. Children dart by, clutching chunks in their hands, gnawing at them, like puppies on bones. Somewhere nearby, a pot of broth simmers, the perfect bath for broken bread. The air is noisy, pungent, and alive, and you realize that what seems boring to us was the quiet comfort of survival to them. And yes, there's a faint humor in it. The medieval version of junk food wasn't fried, sugary, or dipped in chocolate. It was simply last week's loaf, rescued by a handful of salt. So as you wander deeper into these alleys, your pocket a little lighter, your stomach a little fuller, let's hold on to the taste of bread and salt. It's a beginning, a humble one, but it sets the stage for the stranger and sweeter nibbles waiting around the corner. And just before we round that corner, I'll remind you at the end of this first stretch, if this strange little wander pleases you, feel free to like the video and subscribe. That way, you'll always have a place to come back when you're ready to drift again. The air in the town thickens with the smell of roasting meat, and you find yourself drawn by the simplest instinct, a nose twitching at smoke curling up from a crowded stall. Meat, after all, is not something most medieval townsfolk taste often, but when it comes on a stick. Cheap, easy, portable. And surprisingly modern, too, if you think about every food festival you've ever been to. Only here, there's no plastic trays or paper cones, just a sharpened sliver of wood, the kind that doubles as kindling when you're finished. You edge closer, and the sight is both inviting and, if you're honest, a little chaotic. Scraps of pork and chicken sizzle over open flame. Sometimes it's not even prime cuts, but odds and ends, seasoned with whatever herbs or spices are cheapest that week. The stick becomes a democratic tool. Nobles might have silver skewers laid across banqueting hearths, but on the street it's just rough twigs, spearing hunks of fat and meat that drip grease into the fire below. The smell alone sells it. That smoky, salty bite that makes you want to grab one immediately, even if you know you'll burn your tongue. Mainstream fact: sausages were already common in medieval Europe, and many of these skewered snacks were essentially sausage fragments grilled for quick sale. The mixture might include chopped liver, blood, and filler grains, all encased in thin intestine skins. You may not think blood sausage on a stick sounds like carnival food, but for the townspeople, it was fast, hot, and, importantly, cheap. There's evidence from London, Paris, and Lubeck of vendors hawking sizzling pieces of meat outside festivals and church fairs, places where the crowd was already loosened up on ale and cider. It's the late medieval equivalent of stumbling onto a kebab van at midnight. But then comes the quirky tidbit. Some sources hint at eels being treated in much the same way. Yes, you heard that right. Grilled eel chunks threaded on skewers, a chewy, slick cousin of the more familiar fish sticks. Imagine trying to balance one of those slippery little pieces while weaving through a crowd. It's one of those details that makes you both chuckle and grimace, a reminder that street food innovation isn't always glamorous. Historians still argue whether these eels on a stick were genuine everyday street snacks or a more festival-driven oddity, appearing when rivers overflowed with catch and vendors were desperate to sell it before spoilage. The taste, though, must have been sharp and savory. Salted to preserve, spiced when possible, brushed with oil or fat to keep the meat from shriveling into leather. And there's a kind of comfort in the ritual. The warm stick in your hand, the crackle of flame, the sound of the crowd haggling for more. You chew and gnaw, and it doesn't matter that it's not high cuisine. It's hot, it's quick, and it's filling. Your imagination wanders further. You can picture a band of young apprentices crowding around a stall, trading jests, boasting about the biggest bite, their mouths greasy with pork. You can picture the tired washerwoman, coins clutched tight in her palm, handing one over for a single skewer to tide her through another evening. For them, this food is more than just calories. It's a pause, a small pleasure, wrested from a day of labor. Joke 1. Of course, no napkins. You simply wipe your hand on your tunic, and congratulations, you've invented the first medieval dry cleaning bill. Joke 2. Ever wonder why people in paintings look so stern? Maybe it's because they just burned the roof of their mouth on a piping hot sausage. Joke 3. Somewhere, someone's dog is watching all this in agony, tail thumping, inventing the concept of puppy eyes, centuries before Disney animators. It's easy to see why meat on a stick worked. It's efficient. You don't need plates or forks. You don't even need a seat. You stand, you eat, you toss the stick into the gutter, where it will mingle with rushes, peelings, and horse dung until the sweepers come by. No wonder towns rang with these quick meals at every feast day or tournament. At the same time, there's an edge of unease. Food like this was often associated with rowdiness, drinking, and carnival excess. Preachers warned against gluttony, and officials sometimes fined vendors for selling unsuitable scraps or allowing fires too near wooden houses. Yet the trade thrived. It had to. Feeding a hungry, restless crowd was part of keeping order. Better a greasy mouthful than an empty belly with anger to match. The rhythm of the town pulses through you as you bite. Bells toll from a church tower. Merchants haggle over bolts of cloth. Children cry. And above it all, the hiss of dripping fat in open flame. It's a simple sensory symphony, one that ties you unexpectedly to those long-ago snackers. After all, what's the difference between their meat stick and your late-night kebab run? Just centuries of seasoning. Historians, though, still argue whether this style of street food was truly widespread across all of Europe or concentrated in a few bustling centers. Records are patchy, and often what survives is a complaint. Someone fined for improper sales, or a cleric scolding his flock for indulging in too many festival snacks. But even absence speaks volumes. Where there are people, there is hunger. And where hunger meets ingenuity, there is food on a stick. You lean against a stone wall, chewing slowly, watching sparks leap up into the smoky dusk. Somewhere to your right, another vendor starts drumming on a pot to draw attention. To your left, a boy sings a snatch of a song while waving a skewer triumphantly in the air. For a moment, you're one of them, caught in the hum of ordinary life, your hands greasy, your heart warm, your belly soothed. And as the night deepens, you realize something almost funny. For all the centuries that separate you, nothing has really changed. The craving for something hot, salty, and handheld after a long day is universal. You can almost taste the echo of their lives in yours. So, hold that stick firmly, finish the last bite, and let the grease settle comfortably on your fingers. We're only beginning to uncover the strange world of medieval junk food, and already the scents of frying dough beckon from the next corner. But before we wander toward that sweetness, if you're enjoying this little midnight market with me, go ahead, like the video and subscribe, so you'll always have a seat at the table. The smoke from the meat stalls drifts behind you, leaving only a faint charred scent clinging to your cloak. Ahead, though, a sweeter, richer fragrance hovers in the night air, one that sends your stomach turning with curiosity. It's not roasting flesh this time, but oil snapping in pans, dough sizzling as it hits the fat, and a chorus of voices promising fritters so hot they'll singe your fingertips. You're walking into the medieval fairground where fried dough ruled the night. Close your eyes for a second and imagine that smell. It isn't far from what you know now. The carnival funnel cake, the fairground donut, the churro stall by the beach. The medieval equivalent was cruder, yes, but also oddly familiar. A thin batter of flour, water, maybe a touch of honey, if fortune smiled, ladled into hot oil. The edges crisp first, bubbling and curling, while the center stays soft and tender. They call them fritters, wafers, or simply fried cakes, and they vanish as fast as the vendors can pull them from the pan. The mainstream fact here is simple. Frying was absolutely a part of medieval cooking, though oil was expensive and often replaced with animal fat. Recipes for fritters survive in cookbooks from England, France, and Italy as early as the 13th century. Some were plain, some flavored with herbs, others stuffed with fruit, nuts, or cheese. Think of them as the first cousins of your donut holes, only with a medieval twist that occasionally involved stuffing them with peas. Yes, peas. If you thought jelly filling was controversial, try biting into a hot fritter and finding a green sphere inside. And here comes the quirky tidbit. In some places, cooks fried batter not only for people, but for processions. Imagine a line of street performers tossing out hot fritters to the crowd, like Mardi Gras beads. Contemporary accounts hint that festival organizers sometimes commissioned vast pans just for this purpose. The sight of fritters tumbling out in golden heaps must have been pure chaos. Hands snatching, mouths burning, and children crying out that theirs was too hot to hold. It's not hard to imagine one or two fights breaking out over who got the bigger piece. The idea of food as entertainment isn't new. It just happened to be greasier then. Yet historians still argue whether these fried snacks were a common indulgence for average townsfolk or mainly festival treats for wealthier participants. Oil and fat weren't cheap after all, and sugar was still considered a luxury in most regions. Some claim ordinary people enjoyed fritters mostly on feast days, while others point to evidence of everyday frying in regions with abundant olive oil, like southern Europe. The truth probably lies somewhere between. Fritters for special moments, but not so rare that the taste was forgotten in between. Picture yourself at one of these fairs. A makeshift booth creaks under the weight of its iron pan, and the vendor, sleeves rolled up, sweats in the glow of the fire. You stand in line, coins warming in your hand, listening to the hiss and pop of dough sinking into fat. Each time a batch is pulled out, it's laid onto a wooden board, the oil dripping in steady rhythm. No powdered sugar, no fancy glaze. Just the pure, hot crunch of fried grain. You take your bite, and suddenly it makes sense why people jostled and queued for this. It's simple. It's filling. And yes, it's addictive. Joke 1. The medieval fritter might have been the first true hot take. Literally too hot, every time, and nobody ever learned to wait. Joke 2. You know the way we Instagram our food? Imagine someone in 1380 sketching their fritter in a margin with the caption, "That blessed art too hot." Joke 3. The peas inside the fritter? That was the original April Fool's prank. The scene grows more vivid the longer you linger. Music echoes from a nearby square, pipes and drums keeping rhythm as dancers whirl in candlelight. Children dart between stalls, cheeks shiny with grease, while a dog licks discarded crumbs from the mud. You notice how people hover near the fritter stall, not only for food, but for warmth. Fires like these double as gathering places, circles of light in otherwise dark streets. They hum with laughter, gossip, and the occasional loud cough when someone chokes on their first greedy bite. You think back to that stale bread with salt. Compared to these golden fritters, yesterday's crust feels drab. Yet the connection is there. Both are ways to stretch simple ingredients into comfort. The bread gave survival. The fritter gives joy. In a world where life was short, backbreaking, and uncertain, joy mattered, even if it came dripping in fat. Of course, not everyone approved. Preachers thundered against gluttony, reminding the faithful that indulgence, even in fritters, could tip the soul toward damnation. Municipal councils sometimes cracked down on street fires for fear of accidents. Still, the stalls returned, again and again, because the people wanted them. And desire has a way of reshaping rules. There's a kind of poetry in the image. You, standing with your warm fritter, oil seeping into your fingertips, listening to the town buzz around you. The bells overhead mark the hour, but you hardly notice. You're too caught in the rhythm of chewing, swallowing, smiling. The taste lingers, slightly salty, slightly sweet, full of the warmth of fire. The scholars who sift through old cookbooks and records today might debate the reach of these fried indulgences, but you don't feel that doubt. You can smell it, taste it. Imagine the grin of a child clutching a fritter bigger than his hand. That's proof enough, and as you drift on, you realize something amusing. This greasy little circle of dough might have been the great unifier. The peasant, the apprentice, even the minor noble. All of them licked burnt tongues and oily fingers. For once, food made equals out of them. The fairground hum fades slowly as you move away. You lick your lips one last time, brushing crumbs from your tunic. The echoes of laughter and fire cling to you. but already a different sound rises on the edge of the night. Somewhere nearby, mugs clink, and a sweeter aroma beckons. Not food this time, but drink. Ale, cider, and sugary sips that blur the line between necessity and indulgence. And just like the fritters, they'll show you how medieval folk turned survival into comfort, one cup at a time. The night settles thicker now, and the noise of the fair spreads outward into every crooked street. You feel it more than you hear it. The pulse of feet moving toward stalls, the steady chorus of mugs striking wood, and above it all, the sharp scent of alcohol rising on the air. After bread and meat, after fried batter hissing in oil, the next indulgence is liquid. Ale, cider, and the occasional sweetened sip, each cup cheap, hearty, and dangerously easy to swallow. You move with the crowd, guided by the rhythm of tavern doors, swinging open and shut. Step inside one smoky hall, and you're met with long benches lined with elbows, faces flushed in the firelight, and voices raised over the din. Ale is everywhere, dark, cloudy, sour, sometimes strong enough to wobble your knees after a few swallows, sometimes so weak it feels like flavored water. That's no accident. Brewing was daily work, and batches varied. Townsfolk drank small ale, like modern soda, a safer option than the often filthy water. The stronger brews were saved for evenings, wages in hand, throats raw from work, and spirits eager to rise. A mainstream fact, ale and beer were staples of medieval diets, consumed by children as well as adults. In England and Northern Europe, records suggest people drank up to a gallon daily, though most of that was the weak variety. It sounds excessive, but when clean water is scarce and you're burning calories hauling stone, chopping wood, or spinning wool, ale keeps you alive. And in its foamy head, there's also pleasure. Cider, too, had its place. In regions rich with apples, farmers pressed and fermented barrels to keep through winter. The drink was tart, sweet, and sometimes sharp enough to leave a sting in the throat. Travelers in Normandy or Asturias would have found cider as common as ale in England. It carried the taste of the orchard, and for many, it was both comfort and quick cheer. Then the quirky tidbit. Not all sweet drinks were alcoholic. Some vendors sold syrup waters or honeyed cordials, a kind of proto-soda. Imagine boiling herbs or fruit peelings in water, mixing in honey, and serving it lukewarm in wooden cups. Children loved it. Adults pretended it was medicine. Some scholars even point to descriptions of spiced sherbets in southern Europe, a luxury borrowed from Arab traditions, cooled with snow or ice when available. Yes, snow was harvested in blocks and stored underground, dragged out to chill a drink on a hot day. Medieval snow cones, minus the fluorescent syrups. Historians still argue whether sugared drinks were widely available to ordinary people or limited to the wealthy who could afford imported sugar. The evidence leans toward rarity for the poor, but at fairs and festivals, it seems plausible that watered-down versions of honey drinks or herbal cordials made their way into humble mugs. After all, everyone wanted a taste of sweetness, even if it was only a whisper of what nobles enjoyed. The tavern hums with this mixture of flavors. You picture yourself at a bench, hands wrapped around a rough mug, foam sliding down the rim, the liquid lukewarm but oddly satisfying. Beside you, a group of masons argue about the pay owed for repairing the city wall. Across the table, two women gossip about the baker's daughter, their words drowned out by the clatter of dice. The drink ties them together. Every sip lowers the barriers between stranger and neighbor, between master and servant. Joke 1. If you ever thought the beer belly was modern, picture a 13th century Cooper with the same proud curve, his belt straining just as nobly. Joke 2. Cider mugs doubled as alarm clocks. Drink enough, and you'll wake up at dawn whether you want to or not. Joke 3. Sweetened cordials were advertised as good for digestion, which is a polite medieval way of saying, yes, you will regret this later. The sensory details are everywhere. The tavern reeks of damp wool, old smoke, and spilt ale soaking into the rushes on the floor. You hear laughter punctuated by the thump of fists on wood, and the occasional hiccup from a man who has clearly had one mug too many. In the corner, a fiddler scrapes a tune that competes bravely with the noise. The taste in your mouth is heavy, yeasty, with a faint sour edge. And somehow, in this messy mix, you feel oddly at home. Step outside, though, and the mood shifts. Street vendors shout about sweetened drinks, trying to lure children tugging at their mothers' skirts. Somewhere, a stall sells warmed cider spiced with cloves, the scent drifting through the air like incense. It costs a little more than plain ale, but for a few coins, you can sip something that feels like luxury. You watch as a merchant in fine furs buys a cup for his wife, handing it to her with exaggerated flourish. She laughs, sipping slowly, the firelight flickering in her eyes. The place of these drinks in society wasn't just about flavor. They marked class, occasion, even morality. Preachers warned against drunkenness, but they also acknowledged the necessity of ale. Without it, workers would collapse. With too much, they'd riot. Balancing that line was constant. Town officials regulated taverns, taxed brewers, and occasionally closed shops when things got rowdy. But people always found a way back to their mugs. As you stand in the cool night, cup in hand, you reflect on the small irony. This drink you call junk food was essential, a daily anchor, not an optional indulgence. Yet in the excess of fairs and feast days, it slipped into something else. Excitement, celebration, and escape. You sip again, and the world tilts, just a little. The sounds blur, the lights shimmer, and for a moment, you understand the pull. Somewhere behind you, bells toll midnight. The fair doesn't quiet, though. If anything, the energy rises. More mugs lifted, more laughter spilling. You can almost imagine yourself leaning too far into the celebration, cheeks warm, words louder than usual. And yet, even as you sway in the merriment, you catch another smell on the breeze. Not smoke, not ale, but something softer, creamier, more grounded. Cheese. Salty, smoky, crumbly. The kind of quick bite that sits perfectly after too many gulps. So you set down your mug, wipe your mouth on your sleeve, and follow the scent toward the next indulgence. Bread, meat, fritters, drink. Each has had its turn. Now, in the dim alleys lit by guttering torches, dairy waits to tempt you with curds and rinds. A different kind of snack, but no less beloved. You follow the drifting scent until it leads you to a quieter corner of the market, where the torches burn low, and the noise of the tavern fades into a dull hum. Here, the food is not sizzling, not bubbling in oil, not bursting with spices. It is calm, steady, and solid. Cheese. You wouldn't call it glamorous, but after all the fried and the foaming mugs, your body almost sighs at the sight of something crumbly, salty, and grounding. Imagine small stalls built from rough planks, with shelves laid out like patchwork quilts of dairy, pale blocks of soft cheese, harder wheels with cracked rinds, smoky chunks wrapped in cloth, and odd little lumps that look like they've been forgotten in a bag for too long. Each has its place, and each was someone's idea of a portable treat, something you could bite on the way to work or carry in your pouch when heading to the fields. The mainstream fact is this: cheese was a staple of medieval diets. It provided protein and fat, kept longer than fresh milk, and could be eaten on the move. Sources describe it as common fare for peasants and monks alike. Monasteries, in particular, were known for their cheese production, turning milk from their herds into curds, pressing them into molds, and storing them in cool cellars. For laborers who needed calories but couldn't afford meat often, cheese was a practical indulgence. But here comes the quirky tidbit. Some towns actually smoked cheese not only for preservation, but for flavor, creating little nuggets with a dark skin that tasted faintly of ash and wood. Think of it as the medieval cheese puff, dense, chewy, and oddly addictive. One 15th century account even notes cheese rolled in herbs, then fried in butter as a snack for fairs. Yes, fried cheese existed long before your mozzarella sticks. You just didn't have the marinara dipping sauce. Historians still argue whether peasants regularly accessed aged cheeses, or if those were reserved for wealthier tables. Hard cheeses required more milk, more time, and more care. Some say poorer folk stuck to fresh curds and soft cheeses that spoiled quickly, while merchants and nobles boasted wheels of Parmesan or cheddar-like bricks aged for months. The debate lingers because records are uneven, and what survives often reflects the diets of the literate and wealthy. Still, archaeological finds of cheese molds in modest households suggest ordinary people weren't completely excluded from a slice of the good stuff. You picture yourself buying a chunk. The vendor hands it over wrapped in a scrap of cloth, the surface rough against your fingers. You break it open, and the smell is sharp, a little sour, but strangely satisfying. The taste is salty, earthy, with just enough fat to coat your mouth. It's not creamy brie or silky camembert. It's plain, rustic, and stubbornly filling. You chew slowly, the texture squeaking against your teeth, and feel the simple reassurance it offers. Joke 1. If you ever wonder why medieval teeth look bad in illustrations, it might be because everyone spent half their life gnawing cheese that doubled as a whetstone. Joke 2. Smoked cheese? That's just dairy cosplaying as bacon. Joke 3. Monks making cheese in their cloisters were basically running the first all-you-can-eat buffets, except you paid in prayer and silence. Cheese is not just food, it's also social glue. Workers shared chunks during midday breaks. Soldiers carried it as rations, gnawing between marches. Children nibbled on curds while watching animals in the market square. And in noble houses, cheese finished meals, often alongside nuts and fruit. The same basic ingredient stretched across every class, shaped differently, flavored differently, but recognizable everywhere. The texture, though, mattered as much as the taste. Fresh curds crumbled like soft chalk, squeaking faintly. Hard cheeses broke with a snap, sharp edges catching on your tongue. Smoked rinds chewed like leather, releasing flavor slowly. Each bite carried its own rhythm, its own place in the day. And though it may sound dull, to a body hungry for protein, each crumb was welcome. The smell of dairy mixes now with the night air, faintly sour, but softened by the wood smoke drifting from nearby chimneys. You see children laughing as they toss curds to one another, dropping them into the mud and laughing harder still. You see an old woman in a patched cloak nibbling carefully at her piece, her face wrinkling with every bite, yet her eyes satisfied. And you see a merchant tasting slices from 3 different wheels, nodding gravely before haggling for a price. Cheese becomes more than sustenance. It's a marker of identity. The monastery wheel, the peasant's curd, the merchant's aged block, all tell a story of where you belong. In some ways, it is the quietest of snacks, yet also the most universal. The debate among scholars continues, of course. Some argue cheese was merely survival food, bland and functional. Others insist it carried cultural meaning, tied to rituals, fairs, and celebrations. And perhaps both are true. A block of curd in your pouch kept you alive on a long day in the fields, while a wheel of aged Parmesan, grated over noble dishes, transformed a meal into performance. You stand at the stall longer than you expect, nibbling slowly, savoring the balance of salt and fat. Around you, the market shifts. The noise of frying fritters fades, the tavern laughter ebbs, and the cheese stall hums in its quieter rhythm. But even here, indulgence finds its place, because snacks don't need to be loud to matter. Sometimes the best comfort comes not from sizzling pans or overflowing mugs, but from a humble, crumbly block in your hand. You tuck the last piece into your mouth, wipe your fingers on your cloak, and breathe deeply. The night moves on, though, and another scent rises faintly on the breeze. This time it's sharper, fishier, the unmistakable tang of the sea. Somewhere near the docks, vendors call out, promising dried herrings, eel pies, and the promise of something briny. It is a different kind of junk food, one tied to waves and wharves, nets and barrels. And as you step away from the comfort of cheese, you begin to follow that salt-sharp trail toward the next indulgence. You follow the sharper smell now, cutting through the mellow notes of cheese and smoke. It's the sea calling, even though you stand inland. Markets never quite lose the scent of fish, because barrels and baskets travel far from the coast, spilling their tang into streets that otherwise smell of hay and horse. The aroma grows stronger as you approach the fish stalls near the edge of the square. And here, you meet the briniest form of medieval junk food, fishy snacks, quick bites pulled from rivers, lakes, and seas, dried or baked, salted or wrapped in pastry, eaten hot or cold, depending on luck. Picture the stalls, rough tables lined with herrings, their scales dull silver under torchlight. Some hang from racks, stiff as wood after days in smoke. Others lie in barrels of brine, their smell strong enough to make your eyes water. A boy with red hands pulls out a piece and waves it in the air, shouting its price, his voice almost drowned by the gulls circling overhead. And on another table, you spy pies, small, handheld, their crusts dark, the filling a mystery until you bite. These are eel pies, a favorite in many towns along rivers. The mainstream fact here is simple. Dried and salted herring was one of medieval Europe's great trade goods. From the North Sea to the Baltic, herring fleets supplied barrels upon barrels, feeding cities far inland. Fish wasn't only for the coast, it was everywhere. Often cheap, often preserved in brine or smoke. Monks ate it on fast days. Peasants chewed it on long journeys. Merchants sold it in bulk at fairs. To call it junk food might be unfair, but when bought in small portions on the street, eaten with greasy fingers, it served the same quick, filling purpose. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some records suggest eel pies weren't only food, but also part of a strange local pride. In medieval London, the Thames was thick with eels, and eel pies became a city signature. So much so that rents were sometimes paid in eels, measured in barrels or bundles. Imagine handing over fish instead of coins to your landlord. A 13th century record even notes one abbey receiving thousands of eels yearly as rent payment. That's not just a snack, that's currency. Historians still argue whether eel pies were genuinely beloved by all classes or tolerated mostly by those who couldn't afford meat. The pies appear in accounts from royal kitchens, which suggests nobles indulged in them too. Yet some scholars insist noble versions were richer, spiced heavily to mask the taste, while common pies were leaner, saltier, and harder to swallow. The truth may be both. The eel pie was flexible, cheap when plain, luxurious when dressed up with saffron, ginger, or raisins. You imagine biting into one now. The crust is thick, baked hard to seal the filling, and the steam rises as you crack it open. Inside, the eel is soft, slippery, soaked with salt and spice. The taste is strong, fishy, not subtle, but strangely satisfying. It clings to your tongue, demanding attention. You chew slowly, and as you do, the world around you sharpens. The cries of the gulls, the splash of water in a nearby barrel, the vendors calling louder to drown one another out. Joke 1. If you think anchovies on pizza are controversial, try being the medieval kid forced to trade his bread for eel pie at lunch. Joke 2. Paying rent in eels proves that landlords have always been slippery. Joke 3. Dried herring was so common that people joked you could find it in church sermons. Repent, or you'll smell like this barrel forever. The sensory overload grows as you linger. Salt crusts on your lips, the air thick with brine. You hear knives scraping as vendors scale fresh catches, the sound harsh and metallic. A woman smacks two fish together to prove their freshness, while a child tugs at her skirt, begging for a bite. Somewhere, someone drops a barrel, and the crash sends fish rolling across the cobbles, chased by a barking dog. It is noisy, messy, and alive. Fish was more than food. It was tied to religion. The church calendar demanded fasting days, nearly half the year in some regions, when meat was forbidden, but fish was allowed. That rule turned fish into an economic powerhouse, driving trade routes and shaping entire industries. For ordinary folk, it meant fish snacks were both indulgence and obligation. You ate them not just because you wanted to, but because you had to. And vendors made sure to turn duty into something you could buy quickly, cheaply, and carry in your hand. The variety was broad. Pickled herring, dried sprats, smoked mackerel, eel pies, and even tiny fried minnows sold by the handful. Each carried its own taste and texture, each its own little ritual of eating. Children might crunch minnows whole, laughing at the brittle bones, while adults tore into larger, saltier cuts that left their throats dry. You can almost feel the grit of salt between your teeth, the roughness on your tongue, the way the flavor lingers long after the bite is gone. The scholars who study this world puzzle over its contradictions. Was fish really beloved, or was it endured? Did people crave eel pies, or did they settle for them when nothing else was affordable? The answers slip away, as slippery as the eels themselves. But what remains is clear. Fish snacks filled bellies, carried flavor, and left enough memory behind to show up in records centuries later. You finish your imaginary pie, wipe your fingers on your cloak, and breathe through your mouth to escape the lingering tang. Around you, the market shifts again. The noise of fishmongers continues, but another scent rises, floating sweet and sticky above the salt. Honey, nuts, seeds, the promise of something crunchy and indulgent, less about survival and more about pleasure. And so, with the briny taste fading slowly from your lips, you turn from the docks and follow the sweetness toward the next stall. There, beyond the fish, lies another world of medieval junk food. One that sticks to your teeth instead of your fingers. One that promises laughter and sugar highs instead of salt and obligation. You step forward, ready to see what honeycombs, candied seeds, and roasted nuts might reveal. The tang of fish fades behind you, leaving only the faintest salt clinging to your tongue. Now the air grows thicker with another kind of promise. Warmth and sweetness. Somewhere ahead, a vendor stirs honey in a pot, the golden liquid catching the firelight. The crowd shifts around you, drawn not by hunger this time, but by craving. Sweetness was rare, expensive, and tempting, and in the medieval world, honey was king. You reach a stall where wooden boards are piled with combs, dripping slowly, beeswax still clinging to the edges. A man with sticky hands hacks off chunks with a knife, wrapping them in leaves for customers who cannot resist chewing honey straight from the wax. The sight alone makes you pause. It is messy, unrefined, but beautiful. The comb glistens, each bite a burst of sugar, each chew a slow release of golden syrup. It is as much indulgence as food, a snack that hums with energy. The mainstream fact is clear. Before sugar became widespread in Europe, honey was the primary sweetener. Beekeeping flourished in monasteries and rural villages alike. Honey not only flavored dishes, but also preserved fruits, coated nuts, and served as medicine. A pot of honey could mean the difference between bland survival and a treat worth remembering. Festivals in particular leaned on honey, offering candies, glazed fruits, and even sweetened drinks. Now for the quirky tidbit. Candied seeds were a particular favorite. Imagine fennel or anise seeds, coated layer by layer in sugar or honey until they resembled tiny beads. Sold in handfuls, they were chewed to freshen breath or settle the stomach. You might call them the medieval tic-tac. Some records even suggest they were thrown at weddings, showering couples in a rain of sweet little seeds. Just picture it. Guests laughing, children scrambling to pick them from the floor, and someone inevitably sneezing after breathing in too much sugar dust. Historians still argue whether candied nuts and seeds were widely accessible to common people or limited to wealthy townsfolk. Sugar, when imported, cost dearly, but honey was more common, and recipes show ordinary cooks coating walnuts or hazelnuts in honey to create sticky, crunchy bites. Some say these were everyday indulgences at markets. Others insist they appeared mostly at fairs and feast days. The debate continues, as it often does, because records are scattered between recipe books for nobles and stray notes in merchants' accounts. You stand before the stall now, weighing your choices. On one side, candied almonds shine with a glossy coat, still warm from the pan. On another, little clusters of seeds stick together in irregular lumps, promising bursts of flavor. And just at the edge of the board, strips of dried fruit glisten with a thin honey glaze, their sweetness preserved for weeks. You hand over a coin, and the vendor presses a small packet of nuts into your palm, wrapped in parchment. The first bite is immediate crunch. Honey cracks between your teeth, releasing its sugar rush, before the nut beneath grounds it with earthy fat. You chew slowly, feeling the stickiness coat your tongue, your lips, even your fingertips. It is messy, but you don't care. You lick your fingers clean, like countless children have before you, and for a moment, the fare feels brighter. Joke 1. Medieval dentists must have loved candied nuts. They guaranteed repeat customers. Joke 2. Candied seeds were advertised as good for digestion, which is basically history's way of saying, eat more sugar, it's healthy. Joke 3. If you've ever found popcorn stuck between your teeth, imagine that, but with hardened honey and fennel seeds. Congratulations, you've invented medieval floss. The stall is noisy too. Children whine for more, tugging at their parents' sleeves. A man laughs as his beard sticks together with honey, pulling at it with sticky fingers. A young couple shares a piece of comb, each bite pulling strings of golden syrup between their mouths. Even the dogs benefit, licking fallen crumbs from the dirt. The air smells of sweetness, layered with wood smoke, sweat, and the faint spice of cloves drifting from another stall. The presence of these snacks tells you something larger about the world. Sweetness was not just pleasure, it was identity. A merchant able to buy candied citrus could flaunt wealth. A child clutching a honey stick tasted luxury once thought reserved for kings. Even the simplest glazed nut whispered of abundance in a world where most meals were plain. The scholars who dig into these recipes often note how sweetness straddled the line between food and medicine. Honey was praised for healing wounds, soothing throats, and preserving herbs. Seeds like anise and fennel were thought to aid digestion. So while you chew your candied nuts and feel your teeth ache, someone in the 14th century might tell you quite seriously that you are doing your health a favor. And yet, for all the seriousness, you can't help but smile at the scene. The laughter, the crunch, the sticky fingers. It all feels timeless. People crave sugar now just as they did then. The fairground stall becomes a mirror, reflecting centuries of craving and indulgence. You finish your handful of nuts, shake the stickiness from your fingers, and look around. The fair is still alive with shouts and music, but your eyes catch on another booth nearby. Thin batters hiss on griddles, folded into delicate pancakes and crispy wafers. The smell is lighter, subtler, a promise of festival cakes to come. And with your mouth still tingling from honey, you take a step toward that next sweetness. Because in this journey through medieval junk food, there is always another stall waiting, another indulgence calling, and another reminder that even centuries ago, people found joy in the smallest, simplest bites. The honey still clings faintly to your lips as you drift toward a new cluster of stalls, where the air is gentler, less sticky, and more fragrant with flour, milk, and eggs. This is the realm of pancakes, wafers, and festival cakes, the softer cousins of the fried fritter, the kind of indulgence that arrived with special days, fairs, and holidays. Where honeyed nuts were crunchy and chaotic, these are calm, deliberate, and even ceremonial. Picture the scene. Flat griddles laid over glowing coals, their surfaces slicked with a thin smear of fat. A vendor pours a batter that spreads in a circle, sizzling softly as it cooks, filling the air with the scent of warm flour and smoke. He flips it with a practiced hand, stacks it, folds it, sprinkles it with a dusting of spice, and passes it across the board to eager hands. The pancake is thin, pliable, just chewy enough to satisfy. You take a bite and find it both simple and indulgent. Proof that flour and heat alone can create something worth crowding for. The mainstream fact: pancakes, wafers, and festival cakes appear often in medieval cookbooks. Pancakes were common in both peasant and noble households, though ingredients varied. The simplest versions were flour, water, and salt, while richer recipes included eggs, milk, or even a touch of honey. Wafers were crispier, baked in irons with patterned designs, sometimes served in noble feasts between courses. Festival cakes, meanwhile, marked special days: Shrovetide, Easter, or weddings, when cooks prepared sweetened loaves or spiced batters as a break from the ordinary. They weren't everyday bread. They were symbols of occasion. Now for the quirky tidbit. Wafer irons sometimes carried religious symbols or family crests, pressing them into the thin batter like edible seals. Imagine biting into a wafer stamped with a cross, a fleur-de-lis, or the emblem of a guild. It's half snack, half proclamation. In some towns, wafer makers were their own guild, with rules about who could sell where, and fines for those who encroached on another's patch. The wafer wasn't just food, it was politics in flour form. Historians still argue whether pancakes and festival cakes were truly junk food, or more ritual than snack. Some say they were indulgent, eaten on feast days with reckless joy. Others argue they were symbolic, tied to religious calendars and communal identity more than individual craving. The debate rests on whether we should judge them by their flavor or their meaning. And perhaps, as with most food, they were both. Sustenance with a side of symbolism. You hold a pancake now, folded into a rough triangle, still steaming in the cool air. The outside is browned, the inside soft, the edges slightly crisp. You chew, and it tastes both filling and celebratory. There is no sugar glaze, no syrup pouring down the sides, but you don't need it. The warmth alone is enough, and the faint dusting of spice, maybe cinnamon, maybe nutmeg if the merchant had a good week, gives it a depth that feels luxurious. Joke 1. If you've ever flipped a pancake onto the floor, know that medieval cooks did it too. They just called it feeding the dogs. Joke 2. Wafers stamped with religious symbols meant you could technically say grace with your teeth. Joke 3. Festival cakes baked in bulk probably invented the first food fights. Half the children ate them, the other half threw them. The atmosphere around these stalls is lighter than at the fishmongers or taverns. Families gather here, children holding pancakes with both hands, crumbs trailing down their tunics. Musicians play nearby, their tunes dancing through the air as dancers spin in the firelight. You feel the rhythm of celebration, the way food shapes not only the body, but the mood. These cakes and wafers are not about survival. They are about joy. The wafers, in particular, carry an odd allure. Thin, crisp, sometimes layered with honey or jam, they break with a satisfying snap. Some are curled into rolls, others stacked in delicate towers. You buy one and let it melt on your tongue, its lightness a sharp contrast to the heavy bread and cheese you've eaten earlier. It feels fleeting, fragile, almost too delicate for this rough market. But that's what makes it special. Festival cakes, by contrast, are heavier. Small round loaves spiced with ginger, cloves, or cardamom, baked dark and fragrant. They smell like warmth itself, a reminder of holidays and rituals. Eating one is less about indulgence and more about belonging, sharing the same flavors as your neighbors, marking the same days with the same taste. You chew slowly, and the spices linger in your mouth, reminding you that food can carry memory as much as flavor. The scholars who study these cakes often note how recipes vary wildly from one region to another. In Northern Europe, spiced loaves dominated. In southern towns, pancakes flavored with citrus peel or almonds appeared. Each recipe reflects trade, geography, and culture. Yet in all cases, the principle is the same. Take simple ingredients, shape them into something festive, and share them in moments of joy. The night air thickens as more people gather, drawn by the smell of pancakes flipping and wafers crisping. You hear laughter, the crackle of fire, and the sweet crunch of children biting into thin wafers. A girl stamps her foot when her brother steals a piece of her cake, and their mother scolds them while hiding her own smile. The scene is timeless, ordinary, and comforting. You linger with your pancake, savoring the chew, licking the crumbs from your fingers. Around you, the fare shifts again. The sweetness fades into sharper scents. Onions, garlic, spices crushed in mortars. Somewhere nearby, vendors hawk relish, dips, and strong-flavored snacks that sting the tongue and wake the senses. If pancakes and cakes are the gentle lull, then what comes next is the jolt, the spark, the savory bite that cuts through sweetness. So you finish your last mouthful, brush the flour from your tunic, and let the festival sounds guide you onward. Bread, meat, fritters, drinks, cheese, fish, and sweets have each played their part. But now it is time for sharper tastes, the flavors that snap you awake even as the night grows late. The sweetness of wafers lingers faintly as you walk on, but soon another set of scents cuts through, sharp and pungent. They are not comforting like honey, nor mellow like cheese. They are bold, insistent, almost aggressive. You wrinkle your nose, then smile, because you realize you've stumbled upon the medieval version of chips and dip. Onions, garlic, and spiced relishes sold from bowls and baskets, scooped with bread or eaten raw for the jolt. It isn't glamorous, but it wakes you up and makes you laugh, because nothing says junk food more than a bite so strong it sticks with you for the rest of the night. Imagine the stall. Clay bowls lined in a row, each filled with chopped onions, mashed garlic, or sauces flecked with herbs. Vendors scoop them with wooden spoons, plop them onto flatbread, and pass them to customers who want a quick, cheap burst of flavor. These aren't main meals. They're accents, quick shocks to the tongue. One bowl might hold a paste of garlic and vinegar, another a relish of onions, stewed until soft, another a mix of herbs ground into oil. Together, they form a collection of flavors as brash as the street itself. The mainstream fact here is that garlic and onions were staples of medieval diets, grown cheaply and available to nearly everyone. They flavored stews, filled pies, and were eaten raw or pickled as snacks. Contemporary medical texts even praise them as remedies. Garlic for the heart, onions for colds. The poor leaned on them as affordable flavor, while the wealthy enjoyed them cooked with more spices. In every kitchen, from castle to cottage, bulbs of onion and garlic hung from rafters. Now for the quirky tidbit. There are medieval accounts of people chewing raw garlic cloves before battles or hard labor, claiming it gave strength and courage. Imagine a knight preparing for combat, chomping garlic like it's an energy bar. Some even believed garlic could ward off evil spirits, so eating it wasn't just flavor, it was protection. If you've ever worried about bad breath, consider that some medieval folk thought the smell itself kept demons at bay. Useful, but not exactly romantic. Historians still argue whether these sharp flavors were truly enjoyed as snacks in their own right, or if we project modern ideas onto them. Some suggest onions and garlic were eaten casually, like quick bites between tasks, while others insist they were more often cooked into stews. The truth probably sits in between. Raw bulbs and relishes were handy at markets and fairs, while households relied on them as base ingredients. But when you see stalls offering bread smeared with garlic paste or onions pickled in brine, it is easy to picture them as medieval street food, pungent and cheap. You buy a piece of bread topped with onion relish. The bread is coarse, dark, a little stale, but the topping makes up for it. The onions are sweet from long cooking, spiced faintly with pepper, tangy with vinegar. You bite in, and the flavor surges, strong, sticky, irresistible. Around you, people chew noisily, unconcerned with subtlety. This is food meant to fill your mouth with fire and leave you thirsty for ale. Joke 1. Medieval romance probably failed often because both lovers showed up to the date chewing raw garlic. Joke 2. Calling onions chips might be generous, but when you're hungry enough, even tears count as seasoning. Joke 3. Vampires must have had a terrible time trying to snack in medieval Europe. Everywhere they turned, garlic breath. The air around the stalls is thick with spice. Mortars clack as vendors pound herbs, garlic and salt together. Wooden spoons scrape bowls, dripping oil and vinegar onto bread. Customers call out for extra portions, while children make faces at each other after chewing raw onions, daring one another to take bigger bites. It is messy, noisy, pungent, and strangely joyous. The textures are part of the experience. The bread crunches under your teeth, the relish spreads across your tongue, and the garlic lingers in your throat. You feel your lips burn slightly, your eyes water just a little, and you laugh. This isn't refined food. It's the medieval version of late-night hot sauce, the thrill of eating something that stings and satisfies at the same time. For the poor, these snacks mattered. They added life to plain bread, turning stale loaves into something worth chewing. For the wealthy, they added edge to feasts, reminding guests that even amidst silver platters and spices from afar, simple flavors had their place. Garlic and onions bridged worlds, humble yet essential, cheap yet powerful. The scholars who study these traditions often note how onions and garlic appear in both medical and culinary texts. They were seen as functional, medicinal, even mystical. And yet, when you stand here with relish dripping down your fingers, they feel like nothing more than indulgence. Perhaps that's the point. Even the most ordinary foods, given the right setting, become treats. As the night deepens, the noise at these stalls grows. People laugh louder, their mouths full, their breath strong. Vendors fan smoke from their braziers, while dogs scavenge scraps from the ground. Somewhere nearby, a fiddler starts a tune, and voices rise in song, fueled by ale and the fiery courage of garlic. The market feels alive, brighter than the day, a place where even the sharpest flavors are welcome. You wipe your mouth, grin at the burn still lingering on your tongue, and look around. Beyond the relish stalls, you see baskets piled high with fruit, fresh apples, dried figs, wrinkled dates, and pears sliced thin. After the sharpness of onions and garlic, the sweetness of fruit beckons like a balm. So you step away, carrying the memory of pungent bites and stinging breath, ready for something softer. Ahead lies the next indulgence, one rooted in orchards and far-off trade routes, where fruit was both comfort and luxury. Your tongue still tingles faintly from the garlic, but as you wander further, the air changes again. It grows softer, sweeter, touched by the scent of fruit both fresh and dried. In baskets stacked along wooden tables, apples shine in the torchlight. Pears gleam faintly. Figs wrinkle into chewy jewels, and dates lie piled in neat mounds. This is the medieval version of travel snacks, fruit on the go, whether plucked straight from orchards or dried for long journeys. It feels calmer than the sharp tang of relish, and yet no less important in the tapestry of quick bites. You picture a child grasping a small apple, gnawing it noisily as she walks beside her mother in the market. You picture a pilgrim carrying a pouch of dried figs, chewing them slowly on the long road to a shrine. And you picture nobles receiving imported dates or raisins at feasts, each one as precious as a jewel. Fruit was not simply food. It was symbol, medicine, luxury, and sometimes pure survival. The mainstream fact: fresh fruit was a seasonal staple in medieval Europe, especially apples, pears, and plums. Orchards surrounded towns, and seasonal harvests filled markets. Dried fruits, such as figs, raisins, and dates, were imported through trade routes, often from Spain, Italy, or the Levant. These preserved sweets were common in noble kitchens, but filtered down to fairs and markets in smaller, cheaper portions. Even peasants occasionally splurged on dried figs, a handful of raisins, or an apple kept through winter in a cellar. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some fruits were eaten not only as food, but as breath fresheners. Medieval texts mention chewing dried cloves tucked into apples, or nibbling on preserved quince paste for a sweet-smelling mouth. Imagine pulling out a sticky lump of quince candy, not just for the sugar rush, but because you didn't want your breath to smell like eel pie. This was snack food with a social twist, the medieval equivalent of carrying mints in your pocket. Historians still argue whether fruit was widely accessible to the poor, or mostly a luxury beyond their means. Some say orchards provided ample apples and pears for local folk, while dried fruits remained a rare indulgence. Others argue that fairs brought imported figs and dates into broader reach, sold in small quantities to those who could spare a coin. The debate continues, because fruit rots quickly, leaving little trace in archaeology, and written records lean heavily on noble feasts. But even small clues, apple seeds in cesspits or dried grape skins in middens, suggest fruit played a quiet but steady role in medieval diets. You buy a fresh apple from a vendor. Its skin is mottled, not shiny like the polished fruit in modern stores. You bite into it, and the crunch is sharp, tart, with juice that runs quickly down your chin. It tastes real, earthy, both sweet and sour. Around you, others chew pears, their flesh softer, dripping with juice. Children giggle as they drop fruit cores into the mud, chased by dogs who sniff curiously. The market smells brighter now, the heavy tang of fish replaced by the light fragrance of fruit. Next, you try dried figs. The vendor scoops them from a basket, pressing a small handful into your palm. They are wrinkled, sticky, dense. You chew, and the sweetness blooms slowly, richer than honey, grounded by tiny seeds that crack between your teeth. They taste of sun and distance, carrying the memory of faraway orchards. You imagine them packed into the pouch of a pilgrim, eaten one by one as miles pass beneath weary feet. Joke 1. Raisins in medieval bread were probably the first surprise fillings. Half the children loved them. The other half spit them out dramatically. Joke 2. If you think trail mix is modern, remember that a pilgrim's pouch of nuts and dried figs was the original energy bar. Joke 3. Medieval pears were sometimes so soft they turned to mush. Proof that fruit smoothies existed, just in your hands instead of a blender. The sensory mix here is gentler. The crunch of apples, the chew of figs, the soft bite of pears, the sticky sweetness of dates. Each texture tells a story. Each flavor adds a note. You lick your lips, sticky from juice and sugar, and watch the crowd around you. Vendors call out the origins of their fruit, from Spain, from Genoa, from Damascus, boasting of distant places even if their wares came from just down the road. The act of eating fruit became not only indulgence, but a way of touching the wider world. For the wealthy, imported fruit was a signal of power. Candied oranges, preserved quince, and sugared almonds decorated noble feasts. For the poor, a single apple was enough, a reminder of the earth's bounty and the fleeting sweetness of seasons. The divide was sharp, yet the experience united people in craving the same flavors, even if in different forms. Scholars note that fruit also carried symbolism in art and literature. Apples meant temptation. Figs symbolized fertility. Pears appeared in love poetry. Eating fruit was never just about eating. It carried meaning. And yet, standing in this noisy market with juice running down your chin, it feels like nothing more than joy. The scholarly debates can wait. You're too busy licking your fingers. The night deepens, and torches flicker against the baskets of fruit. Children beg for more figs. Women pack apples into cloth sacks. Men chew dates while leaning against the walls. The scene is timeless, full of life and sweetness. You realize how universal this craving is, how fruit bridged classes and regions. Everyone wanted a bite of sugar, whether from orchards or caravans. You finish your last fig, sticky seeds clinging to your teeth, and look ahead. The market does not end here. Beyond the fruit stalls lies another world, where indulgence is no longer everyday, but exotic. Spices from distant lands, candied citrus, loaves of sugar gleaming like treasure. These are the luxury snacks of medieval life, the indulgences of the wealthy that trickled down to markets as whispers of distant lands. So you wipe your sticky hands on your cloak, swallow the last sweetness, and step forward. Ahead, the smell sharpens again. Cinnamon, ginger, candied peel. Promises of wealth and wonder. The next stall glitters not with simple apples, but with imports that changed the very meaning of junk food. The market changes tone as you step away from the baskets of fruit. The familiar scents of apples and figs soften, giving way to sharper, richer aromas. Cinnamon, ginger, and cloves drift through the cool night air, blending with the faint sparkle of sugar that catches the torchlight. You've reached the stalls where exotic imports reign, the luxury junk food of the medieval world, indulgences that hinted at wealth, trade, and power. At first glance, the tables look similar to others, with baskets, jars, and folded cloths. But a closer look reveals the difference. There are lumps of white sugar, shaped into tall loaves, wrapped in cloth to keep them dry. There are strips of candied citrus peel, their edges glittering with crystals. Jars of syrup glisten like jewels, and bowls of spiced almonds invite greedy fingers. The colors, the scents, the shimmer of wealth. This is a different kind of snack. One less about filling bellies and more about showing status. The mainstream fact. Sugar began entering Europe in larger quantities during the late Middle Ages, imported from the Mediterranean and later from colonies farther afield. At first it was medicine, sold by apothecaries, measured out in tiny doses. But as trade expanded, sugar became a symbol of luxury. Nobles commissioned elaborate sugar sculptures for feasts, while merchants showed off their wealth by offering candied treats at festivals. Ordinary folk rarely tasted sugar, but at fairs and markets, they could sometimes buy a single piece, a small bite of glamour from distant lands. Now for the quirky tidbit. Sugar loaves were so valuable that they were sometimes locked away like treasure. Servants were accused of chipping bits off the edges to snack when their masters weren't watching. One court record even describes a scuffle over stolen sugar lumps, treated as seriously as theft of coins. Imagine sneaking into the pantry for a spoonful of sugar, only to face legal charges for your sweet tooth. Historians still argue whether these imported sweets filtered down to common markets often, or whether they stayed locked in noble halls. Some say fairs offered sugared almonds and candied peel in small portions to tempt wider crowds. Others argue such stalls catered only to the wealthier townsfolk, with poorer buyers limited to honeyed nuts and fruits. The truth, as usual, is probably mixed. Enough luxury reached the streets to tease, but not enough to satisfy. That tension itself made the sweets all the more alluring. You reach out and take a candied almond. Its coating is hard, glossy, clinging with spice. You bite, and the crunch gives way to the nut beneath, warm and rich. The sugar clings to your teeth, the spice lingers on your tongue, and you feel the indulgence in every chew. Around you, others nibble carefully, savoring each piece as though it were gold. Joke 1. In a world where sugar was locked up, the first candy thieves were probably also the first dental criminals. Joke 2. Nobles who built sugar sculptures for feasts invented the original gingerbread house, just with higher insurance premiums. Joke 3. Candied citrus peel was so exotic that some people probably bragged, "Yes, I ate orange skin and I liked it." The atmosphere at these stalls is different. There is less noise, more reverence. Buyers speak softly, counting coins carefully. Vendors guard their wares with sharp eyes, knowing the value of each crystal. The torches shine on the jars and loaves, turning them into treasures on display. You almost feel like you're in a jeweler's shop rather than a food market. The sensory experience is dazzling. The smell of cinnamon curls upward, warm and spicy. The sugar crystals crunch between your teeth, catching the light as they fall. The syrup glistens on your fingertips, sticky and golden. You lick it clean, tasting sweetness unlike anything else you've had tonight. Compared to bread, cheese, or even fritters, these snacks feel unreal, like glimpses of another world. For the wealthy, these foods were more than indulgence. They were performance. To serve candied fruit at a banquet was to announce that you had connections, trade routes, and wealth to spare. To give sugared almonds at a wedding was to declare status. And for those of humbler means, even one taste was a memory worth carrying. The scholars who study these luxuries note how quickly sugar shifted from medicine to food. In apothecaries' ledgers, sugar was prescribed for coughs, fevers, and melancholy. Yet in kitchens, it coated nuts, fruits, and seeds. The transition is fascinating. A substance meant to heal became one meant to please. And in that change, you see the birth of modern junk food. Sweetness for the sake of sweetness. You look around and notice how people react differently to these stalls. A wealthy merchant buys a bundle of candied peel for his wife, handing it to her with pride. A boy stares longingly at the sugar loaves, tugging at his mother's sleeve, only to be pulled away. A servant counts coins nervously before buying a single almond, tucking it into his pocket like a jewel. Each person sees not just food, but desire. The night deepens as you linger, the air rich with spice and sugar. You realize how far you've traveled in flavor already, from stale bread and salt to roasted meat, from fried fritters to candied peel. Each stall adds a new note, a new glimpse into the cravings of a world both familiar and distant. And yet, as you turn from the glitter of sugar, another smell rises, savory, hot, unmistakably rich. It is the scent of pies, their crusts golden, their fillings bubbling. Street pies, hot from carts, promise mystery in every bite. They are not luxury like sugar, but they are indulgence, portable and plentiful, waiting just ahead. So you wipe the sugar from your hands, swallow the lingering sweetness, and step toward the carts. Ahead lies the heart of medieval street food, where pies of meat, fruit, or something less certain call to you with steam and spice. You leave behind the sparkle of sugar and spice, stepping into a busier, louder corner of the market. Here the air is thicker, smoky, fragrant with hot pastry and bubbling fillings. Wooden carts stand in rows, their iron pans glowing with heat, their vendors shouting above the din. This is street pie culture, the bustling core of medieval junk food, where meat, fruit, and mystery mingled under crusts and sold for a handful of coins. The scene feels timeless. Pastry shells, some thick as shields, others thin and flaky, crowd the boards. Some pies are large, sliced into wedges for customers who can't afford a whole one. Others are small hand pies, portable and wrapped in cloth, perfect for travelers and laborers. Steam rises from broken crusts, carrying the scent of spiced meat, stewed apples, or onions and fish. The pies call to you, promising warmth, fullness, and a gamble. What exactly will you get inside? The mainstream fact. Pies were a cornerstone of medieval street food, known as coffins. When large, these pastry cases preserved their fillings for days, even weeks. In markets, smaller versions were sold hot, stuffed with whatever the vendor had on hand: pork, beef, fish, vegetables, or fruit. Cookbooks from the 13th and 14th centuries are filled with pie recipes, from noble feasts to humble suppers. Street vendors adapted them for the crowd, offering cheap portions that could be eaten on the go. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some pie crusts were never meant to be eaten. In large coffin pies, the crust was purely functional, a container to hold meat and gravy. After baking, the crust hardened into a shell so tough it could break teeth. Diners scooped out the filling and discarded the pastry. But for hungry children or dogs, even that crust became food, soaked with flavor. Imagine gnawing on the throwaway part and feeling like you'd won a secret prize. Historians still argue whether most street pies contained quality fillings or scraps barely fit for consumption. Some suggest vendors used offcuts, gristle, and even spoiled meat masked with spice. Others argue that pies often contained decent ingredients, since vendors relied on repeat customers. The debate continues, and perhaps the truth lies in variety. Some pies were rich, others dubious, and buyers never knew exactly which they would get. You approach a cart, the vendor's apron stained with flour and grease. He lifts the lid of a pot, revealing steaming chunks of pork swimming in onion and pepper. Another tray holds fruit pies, their crusts bubbling with juice. He cuts you a wedge, places it in a scrap of paper, and hands it over. The crust crumbles in your fingers, greasy and warm. You bite, and hot meat floods your tongue, seasoned with herbs and heavy with fat. It is messy, salty, delicious, and undeniably filling. Joke 1. Street pies were the original mystery box meal. You never knew if you'd get beef, fruit, or disappointment. Joke 2. Calling a rock-hard coffin crust edible was medieval marketing at its finest. Joke 3. If modern fast food comes with slogans, the street pies would be hot, cheap, and maybe safe. The sensory overload is powerful. The crust crunches, flakes, and leaves grease on your lips. The filling clings to your mouth, rich with spice and onion. The smell is intoxicating, drawing more people to the cart. Children clutch small pies, biting too quickly and burning their tongues. Merchants lean against walls, chewing thoughtfully while discussing prices. Dogs circle the carts, hoping for dropped crumbs. The street feels alive, a chorus of chewing, laughing, and haggling. Pies were more than food. They were portable meals in a world where portability mattered. Workers carried them into fields. Sailors packed them on ships. Soldiers ate them on marches. At fairs, they served as quick bites between dances and games. In taverns, they were sold hot alongside ale. Pies bridged gaps between classes, too. Nobles feasted on elaborate pastries with saffron and raisins, while peasants gnawed on pies filled with onions and scraps. The form was universal, even if the fillings marked wealth. Scholars studying pie culture note its importance in daily rhythm. Bread fed you, but pies delighted you. Bread was predictable. Pies were varied. Bread was plain. Pies were surprise. This contrast gave pies a special place, turning necessity into adventure. Eating one was never just eating. It was tasting possibility, even risk. You finish your wedge, licking grease from your fingers, and consider the layers of meaning baked into the crust. There is comfort in the warmth, joy in the spice, humor in the unpredictability. You feel closer to the ordinary folk who crowded these carts centuries ago, sharing the same laughter, the same hunger, the same gamble of flavor. The noise rises again as more pies emerge from ovens. Vendors call out, praising their fillings, competing for customers. Some wave knives, slicing pies with theatrical flair. Others hold up crusts to show steam rising, proof of freshness. The air thickens with scent, smoke, and spice. It is chaotic, vibrant, and irresistible. Yet even as you chew your last bite, another layer of the fare beckons. Beyond the pies, you hear quieter voices, softer stalls. These are not filled with meat or fruit, but with herbs, roots, and small candies thought to aid digestion. Herbal treats and digestive chews wait in the shadows, promising relief from all the richness you've consumed. They are snacks with a purpose, straddling the line between medicine and indulgence. So you wipe your greasy hands, step away from the carts, and follow the softer scent of mint and anise. The pies linger on your tongue, heavy and filling, but curiosity drives you forward. Ahead lies a world of small chews, herbal candies, and remedies disguised as sweets. The next step in your journey through medieval cravings. The grease of the pie still clings faintly to your lips, but the night air soon clears your palate with a sharper, fresher scent. You drift toward a quieter row of stalls, less noisy than the pie sellers, more measured in tone. Here, the vendors speak softly, calling out remedies as much as snacks. On their tables lie bowls of seeds, bundles of roots, jars of candied herbs, small things, chewed in handfuls, promise to soothe stomachs, refresh breath, or brighten moods. This is the realm of herbal treats and digestive chews, where the line between medicine and indulgence blurs. Picture a table lined with little cones of parchment, each filled with seeds glistening faintly from sugar or honey. A vendor dips a wooden spoon into a bowl of anise seeds, coated until they resemble tiny pearls, and pours them into a cone for a waiting child. Another stall offers fennel seeds roasted with honey, meant to be chewed slowly after a heavy meal. Beside them sit candied ginger slices, their edges sparkling, fiery and sweet at once. These aren't meant to fill bellies like pies or fritters. They're meant to linger, to refresh, to soothe. The mainstream fact: digestive aids were common in medieval diets, particularly in wealthy households, where feasts often ran heavy with meat and fat. Cooks and physicians alike recommended anise, fennel, mint, and ginger to settle the stomach. Recipes survive for candied seeds, sugared roots, and herbal lozenges, often described as comfits. By the 15th century, comfits had become fashionable among nobles, served at the end of banquets in silver bowls. But simpler versions, coated in honey rather than sugar, appeared at markets too, offering ordinary people a chance at sweetness disguised as health. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some accounts describe comfits being tossed into the air at weddings, showers of tiny sweets raining down on guests. Children scrambled to pick them up from the floor. Adults laughed, and someone always complained about a seed landing in their drink. Imagine attending a wedding where, instead of confetti, you're pelted with fennel seeds. That's celebration and snack combined. A medieval party favor you could actually chew. Historians still argue whether these herbal candies were widely available to common folk or remained largely aristocratic luxuries. The cost of sugar kept many recipes expensive, but honey was cheaper, and evidence suggests vendors coated seeds and roots in honey for sale at fairs. Archaeological digs even find charred fennel seeds in medieval towns, suggesting everyday use. The debate lingers because written records tend to describe elite tables, yet the persistence of comfits in folklore hints that poorer people enjoyed them too, if less extravagantly. You buy a cone of anise comfits. They rattle faintly in the paper as you pour a few onto your tongue. At first they crunch hard, the coating brittle. Then they release the sharp licorice taste of anise. The flavor is strong, strange, a mix of sweet and herbal, cooling your mouth after the heavy pie. You chew slowly, letting the taste settle. Around you, others nibble candied ginger, wincing at the fiery bite before smiling at the warmth it leaves. Joke 1. If you think breath mints are awkward today, imagine leaning in for a kiss while chewing licorice seeds loud enough to echo. Joke 2. Candied ginger, the original prank candy, because it looks sweet, but bites back. Joke 3. Fennel comfits as wedding confetti probably led to the first medieval complaints about health and safety. The atmosphere here is calmer, more intimate. Vendors don't shout. They murmur about health benefits, quoting physicians and saints. One woman promises her comfits will cure melancholy. Another insists candied ginger keeps away bad air. A man in a patched cloak chews mint leaves, nodding gravely as if confirming her claims. The smell is gentler too. Mint sharpness, ginger heat, anise sweetness, blending into the night air. The sensory details are subtle but vivid. Seeds crunch between your teeth. Tiny bursts of sweetness, followed by sharp herbs. Ginger warms your throat, leaving you both soothed and alert. Mint cools your mouth, washing away the heaviness of garlic and pies. These aren't snacks that overwhelm. They refresh. They reset, preparing you for the next indulgence. The scholars who study medieval medicine note how closely food and healing were tied. What you ate shaped your humors, your balance, your spirit. A handful of seeds wasn't just candy, it was therapy. People believed these chews calmed the stomach, brightened the heart, even eased headaches. In practice, they probably did little more than freshen breath, but perhaps that alone was comfort enough. You watch the scene unfold around the herbal stalls. A child crunches ginger, his face scrunching in surprise before breaking into laughter. A pair of merchants chew fennel seeds while discussing wool prices. A young woman buys mint comfits, tucking them into her purse as though saving a secret treasure. These small snacks weave into everyday life, less showy than fritters, less filling than pies, but just as important in their way. The night deepens, the firelight flickering on jars of comfits and bowls of ginger. You realize how much these tiny treats connect past to present. Every breath mint, every after-dinner sweet, every herbal lozenge owes something to this tradition. Even now, people reach for sugar-coated seeds at weddings in parts of the world, carrying on a custom centuries old. And as the flavors fade on your tongue, you sense another pull in the air. Beyond the calm of the herbal stalls, the market grows louder again. A hum of shouting, laughter, and bells rings from the heart of the square. The smells thicken. Meat, dough, smoke, sweat. This is not the quiet of remedies, but the chaos of markets themselves, where sellers shout louder than bell ringers to catch the crowd. It is time to leave behind the calm chew of fennel seeds and step back into the noisy, overwhelming heart of medieval indulgence. So you tuck the last comfit into your cheek, savor its sweetness as it melts, and move toward the clamor. Ahead lies not a single stall, but the riot of market life itself, where food, noise, and temptation swirl together in sensory overload. The calm of herbal comfits fades as you step deeper into the market square, and suddenly the world explodes into sound. Bells clang from the church tower, competing with the brash voices of vendors. Each stall seems to shout louder than the last. Hawkers thrusting pies, fritters, and mugs into the air. Children cry out, dogs bark, fiddles scrape, and the whole space swirls with noise and motion. If the earlier stalls whispered of sweetness or soothed with herbs, here the market itself becomes the show. An overload of smells, sights, and temptations. You pause, taking it all in. Smoke from braziers drifts upward, carrying the scent of grilled meat and fried dough. Somewhere, a man flips pancakes, their batter spattering onto the coals. Another ladles broth into bowls, shouting that his stew cures hunger faster than a priest's prayer. The crowd pushes and pulls around you, each person chasing flavor, each vendor promising theirs is best. The mainstream fact: medieval markets were central not only to food, but to community life. Records describe stalls packed into squares, each with licenses, taxes, and regulations. Food sellers competed fiercely, their cries noted even in town ordinances. Chroniclers mention the noise as a defining feature, comparing markets to carnivals of sound and smell. In larger cities like Paris or London, the density of food vendors could overwhelm a visitor, filling streets with smoke and chatter. Now for the quirky tidbit. One record from a Flemish town notes that pie sellers were fined for shouting so loudly they drowned out the church bells. Imagine that. Your marketing voice stronger than the toll calling people to prayer. It's both absurd and strangely fitting. The hunger of the body battling the duty of the soul, with food stalls often winning. Historians still argue whether this chaotic sensory overload was truly appealing, or if chroniclers exaggerated the din to criticize urban life. Some suggest markets were orderly, with strict regulations keeping stalls in neat rows. Others argue the disorder was the point. Noise, smell, and spectacle drew buyers. Archaeology shows charred bones, broken pots, and scattered seeds near market sites, hinting that chaos was real, not just imagined. The debate continues, fueled by fragments of law, complaint, and song. You push forward through the crush. A fishmonger slaps herrings onto his table, their briny smell cutting through the sweetness of candied nuts nearby. A baker waves a tray of rolls still steaming, shouting that they're blessed by Saint Honoré himself. Children dart between legs, clutching fritters that drip oil onto the mud. Everywhere you turn, hands are grabbing, mouths chewing, voices clashing. It is overwhelming, dizzying, but also thrilling. Joke 1. If noise alone counted as seasoning, every medieval snack here would taste like shouting. Joke 2. You don't need a clock in the market. You can tell the time by which vendor is yelling the loudest. Joke 3. The bell ringer probably invented noise canceling by stuffing onions in his ears. The sensory layers pile higher. You hear the crack of crust as someone bites into a pie, the crunch of wafers snapping between teeth, the slurp of ale pouring into mugs. You smell onion, garlic, cinnamon, fish, and smoke all blending into a single heavy fog. You see the glisten of honey, the shimmer of sugar, the grease shining on children's cheeks. It is all too much, and yet just enough. This is what indulgence looks like when it floods a community, not tucked into kitchens or whispered in recipes, but shouted and shared in public. The market is also theater. Vendors compete with jokes, songs, and dances. One man balances a pie on his head to prove it's sturdy. A woman tosses fritters into the crowd, laughing as children scramble. Musicians play, their tunes half drowned, but still threading through the chaos. Eating here is not only about food, it is about being part of a scene, a swirl of humanity where nothing is still. Scholars who study medieval urban life point out how markets embodied both order and disorder. The town council set prices and issued rules, but vendors constantly bent them. Inspectors fined sellers for cheating weights or using rancid meat, yet customers kept buying. The market was a compromise, a place where law, economy, and appetite clashed and coexisted. The noise, the smell, the clutter, all part of the balance. You weave through the stalls, biting a piece of bread smeared with garlic, then sipping a cup of spiced cider. Each taste blurs into the next. Each sound layers over another. You feel both exhilarated and exhausted, as though the market has pulled you into its rhythm. And you realize something quietly profound. This chaos was ordinary life. For townsfolk, the market was not unusual. It was weekly, daily, expected. Only for you does it feel overwhelming, because you arrive as an outsider, dazzled by the din. The torches burn lower now, their smoke curling through the cold night air. Vendors shout more desperately, eager to sell the last of their goods. Prices drop. Pies are sliced thinner. Fritters offered in twos. Children beg for one more treat. Merchants grab final bites before trudging home. The bells toll again, but the noise barely dims. The market ends only when the food runs out or the fire gutters. And yet, beneath the shouting, another voice rises, not of vendors, but of preachers and moralists. For all the joy and excess, medieval society carried deep suspicion about indulgence. Gluttony ranked among the deadly sins, and no place tempted more than a noisy, fragrant market. The next stage of your journey will bring you face to face with those warnings, those uneasy words about fried dough and candied seeds. So you step back from the noise, your head buzzing, your stomach full, your clothes dusted with crumbs. You turn toward the quieter street where sermons echo faintly, promising not indulgence, but caution. Bread, fish, pies, herbs, and fruit have all shown their allure. Now it is time to see how the guardians of morality judged them, and whether they thought such joy was worth the soul's risk. The noise of the market still hums in your ears as you step into the quieter side streets. Here, the glow of torches fades, replaced by the softer flicker of lanterns hung near doorways. The shouts of vendors die down, and another kind of voice begins to take over. The measured tones of preachers and moralists who have long warned against the dangers of gluttony. For every sticky fritter and greasy pie, there was someone ready to remind you that too much pleasure in food might cost you more than a stomachache. It might, they insisted, doom your soul. You can almost picture it now. A friar standing at the edge of the square, his brown robe dusty, his hand raised for silence. His sermon is not about politics or kings, but about food. "Beware the belly," he cries, "for the belly is a trap. He who fills his mouth too often empties his spirit." The crowd listens half-heartedly, some chewing fritters even as he speaks. It is a comic scene, but also revealing. In the medieval imagination, food was never just food. It was morality, temptation, and discipline wrapped in one. The mainstream fact: gluttony was one of the 7 deadly sins, preached against across medieval Europe. Religious writers warned that overeating dulled the mind, weakened the body, and opened the door to other sins. Monastic rules emphasized moderation, and sermons often singled out street food, especially fried dough and sweet treats, as dangerous indulgences. Fasting days were meant not just for health, but for discipline, keeping appetites under control. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some sermons specifically targeted pancakes and fritters during carnival season, describing them as devilish wheels that spun people into sin. Imagine being told that your snack is literally the devil's pastry. In some towns, preachers staged mock trials of food, sentencing pies and fritters to public scorn. The crowd laughed, but the message was clear. Food could be funny, but it could also be fatal. Historians still argue whether ordinary townsfolk took these warnings seriously. Some evidence suggests people listened, adjusting diets during Lent and avoiding overindulgence. Other records hint that many simply laughed, treating sermons as background noise while enjoying their treats. The debate continues, fueled by the gap between official moral teaching and the earthy reality of fairs and markets. You find yourself torn between laughter and unease. On one hand, the friar's voice booms with authority, his words heavy with warning. On the other, you see a child licking honey from her fingers, utterly unconcerned with sin. You see a man biting into a pie, nodding politely to the preacher, but refusing to stop chewing. The tension between appetite and morality plays out in every corner of the street. Joke 1. If gluttony was truly a deadly sin, half the medieval market would have been condemned before lunchtime. Joke 2. Calling fritters devilish wheels makes you wonder if Satan spent his time inventing carnival food. Joke 3. Monks who warned against sweets were probably just jealous they couldn't sneak a bite in public. The sensory contrast here is striking. The noise of frying, the smell of sugar, the crunch of pies, all clash with the solemn cadence of sermons. You hear bells marking prayer hours, while vendors still shout for customers. You smell incense wafting from a nearby chapel, mixing with the odor of roasted meat. It is a tug-of-war between sacred and profane, between body and soul. For the church, the stakes were high. Food was central not only to survival, but to identity. Eating too much, or eating too indulgently, was seen as surrendering to the flesh. Yet for ordinary people, food was one of the few accessible pleasures. A fritter was not just dough. It was laughter, warmth, and joy in a hard world. The clash was inevitable. The scholars who study this period note how morality and food intertwined in fascinating ways. Recipes often included notes on when to eat certain foods for spiritual safety. Markets were regulated not only by price, but by church calendars. Even sweets could be labeled sinful or holy, depending on the season. And through it all, ordinary people negotiated between appetite and sermon, finding their own balance. You walk slowly past the friar, hearing his words fade as you chew the memory of honey and garlic. His warnings echo, but they do not erase the joy you felt at the stalls. Instead, they add another layer, the knowledge that every indulgence carried weight beyond the stomach. In this world, even snacks were moral choices. The night grows colder, the torches burn lower, and the sermons thin as the crowd disperses. But you sense another question waiting in the air. If gluttony was condemned, how did different people experience indulgence? Did peasants and nobles face the same warnings, or did their treats tell different stories? The next step in your journey leads you into that comparison. Everyday indulgence for the poor, playful trifles for the rich. Two sides of the same craving, divided by wealth, but united by appetite. So you leave the moralists behind, their voices still ringing faintly, and walk toward the brighter lights of noble halls and the humbler stalls of workers. Bread, fritters, pies, herbs, and sermons have all shaped your journey. Now it is time to compare the plates of peasants and nobles and see how indulgence looked from both ends of the table. The friar's warnings linger in your ears, but you push on, curious now not only about food itself, but about how differently people experienced it. Markets showed you one side, children with sticky fingers, laborers gnawing on pies, apprentices laughing over meat skewers. Yet somewhere, just beyond these same streets, nobles reclined in halls lit by chandeliers, their feasts abundant with imported spices and sugared trifles. Everyday indulgence and elite indulgence were two very different worlds, yet they circled the same craving, the desire for something more than survival. You picture the peasant first. His meal is simple: coarse bread, onions, maybe cheese if fortune smiles. But on market days or feast days, he can splurge on a fritter, a slice of pie, or a handful of candied seeds. These are rare moments, small luxuries tucked into the rhythm of labor. The joy lies not in variety, but in the break from monotony. A single sweet apple in winter, a fried cake at carnival, a mug of strong ale at harvest. They become memories, anchors in a year otherwise ruled by toil. For him, indulgence is brief, affordable, fleeting, but it matters deeply. The mainstream fact: records show that peasants' diets relied heavily on bread and pottage, with meat and sweets rare. Yet archaeological finds, charred bones, fruit pits, fish scales, prove that on special days, they enjoyed far more variety than stereotypes suggest. Markets and fairs were key opportunities, offering indulgence in affordable bites. Festivals, in particular, opened the gates, allowing even the poorest to taste fried dough, spiced pies, or candied fruit. Now contrast that with the noble. His feasts are staged performances, blending food, art, and status. Trifles of cream and almonds, sugared sculptures shaped like castles, roasted peacocks served with gilded feathers, restored, all designed to dazzle. For him, indulgence is not fleeting. It is expected, a daily marker of wealth. Imported spices coat his meats, sugar sweetens his fruits, and wine flows more freely than water. Where the peasant saves for a single fritter, the noble toys with candied ginger as an afterthought, discarding it half-eaten. Here comes the quirky tidbit. Some noble feasts featured edible tableware, wafers or thick slices of bread called trenches used as plates. Guests ate the food, and sometimes the plate too, or passed the greasy breads to servants after the meal. Imagine boasting that your dinner came with a plate you could chew. It is both absurd and telling. Indulgence wasn't just about taste, it was about display, about proving that even utility could be decadent. Historians still argue whether these divisions were as stark in practice as they appear in records. Some claim that ordinary folk occasionally accessed noble foods through trickle-down trade, while nobles sometimes enjoyed simple rustic dishes for novelty. The boundary between classes blurred in places, yet the scale of indulgence remained lopsided. A peasant's rare pie never compared to a noble's sugared banquet. Still, both groups shared the same impulse: to turn necessity into pleasure when possible. You imagine yourself walking between these worlds. On one side, the bustling market stalls where peasants jostle for fritters, their coins clinking nervously. On the other, a great hall glowing with candles, where nobles lean back in carved chairs, while servants parade dishes across long tables. Both scenes hum with laughter and chewing, but the flavors and meanings differ. The peasant's snack is survival dressed up. The noble's trifle is excess dressed down. The textures underline the contrast. The peasant bites into coarse bread, rough and chewy, saved by garlic paste smeared on top. The noble nibbles marzipan shaped into animals, soft and delicate, flavored with rosewater. The peasant chews dried fish, salty and briny, while the noble sips spiced wine, warm with cloves. Each bite carries a message. For the poor, resilience. For the rich, dominance. Joke 1. Nobles serving peacocks with feathers reattached basically invented medieval cosplay dinners. Joke 2. Peasants paying with eels for pies proves that everyone was bartering their rent away for snacks. Joke 3. Edible plates at noble feasts were the original zero-waste lifestyle. Only it wasn't about the planet, just about bragging rights. The sensory contrasts overwhelm you as you walk this imagined divide. In the market, the smell of sweat, smoke, and fried dough crowds your nose. In the hall, incense and spices dominate, each wafting through the air like perfume. In the market, mugs clatter, vendors shout, and children laugh. In the hall, minstrels play lutes, servants shuffle, and nobles murmur politely between bites. The two worlds exist side by side, touching, but rarely blending. And yet, despite the differences, you sense a shared thread. Both peasant and noble lean into food for comfort, joy, and identity. The peasant finds happiness in a fritter bought after harvest. The noble in sugared almonds scattered across a silver dish. Both smile, both chew, both remember. Food bridges the chasm of class, even as it highlights it. The scholars who debate these matters point out how social identity was expressed through food. To eat certain things marked you as poor or rich, humble or powerful. Yet hunger and craving often blurred those lines. A noble might nibble on a humble apple in his orchard, just as a peasant might dream of tasting saffron in a pie. In that craving, both were human. Both were equal. You stand now at the edge of both worlds, imagining the flavors lingering on your tongue. Garlic bread from the market, marzipan from the hall, cider from a wooden mug, spiced wine from a silver goblet. You realize that indulgence is not one thing, but many. Sometimes survival with flair, sometimes extravagance with style. Both forms matter. Both tell stories. The night deepens outside, and you step back into the open air. Behind you, the market quiets as vendors pack their wares. Ahead, the noble hall still glows, its music drifting faintly. You are caught between, tasting both, belonging to neither. And in that moment, you feel the richness of the medieval world, not in one snack or another, but in the contrast itself. As the torches burn low, another thought stirs. What becomes of all this indulgence when time passes? What echoes of bread, pies, fritters, or trifles remain centuries later? The answer lies not in the halls or markets alone, but in the cravings that survive to this day. And that is where your path now leads, toward the bridge between medieval cravings and modern snacks, the echoes that still linger in every bite of candy, every bag of chips, every sweet pastry sold on a corner. So you breathe deeply, let the sense of both market and hall fade, and step forward. The next stage will take you beyond class divides into the continuity of taste itself. From then until now, you leave the noble hall behind, its candlelight glowing faintly in the distance, and return to the quieter streets where the market once roared. The night is cooling now, the torches burning low, the smell of fried batter fading into the smoke of dying coals. Yet even in the hush, the memory of those stalls lingers on your tongue. Bread with salt, greasy meat skewers, sticky honeycombs, sharp garlic, sweet figs, luxurious sugar loaves, and steaming pies. All of it tumbles together in your mind, forming a tapestry of taste. And as you walk, you realize that while the stalls close, the cravings they fed never truly vanish. The mainstream fact here is that many foods we consider everyday snacks now, pies, fritters, candied nuts, sugared fruits, have roots in medieval street food. Recipes evolved, spices traveled, techniques changed, but the essence remained. The search for cheap, portable, delicious bites. A hand pie in a medieval fair is not so different from a turnover sold in a bakery today. A fritter sizzling in lard has much in common with the donuts frying in modern oil. Even sugared almonds survive almost unchanged, still handed out at weddings, still chewed as both treat and tradition. And here comes the quirky tidbit. There are records of medieval cooks making a dish suspiciously like French fries. Not potatoes, of course, since those came later, but strips of parsnip or carrot fried in fat and served with salt. Imagine reaching for your bag of fries and realizing it's the echo of a peasant's carrot snack 7 centuries ago. Junk food, it seems, has always found a way. Historians still argue whether it is fair to call these foods junk at all. For many, they were sustenance, not frivolity. Bread and onions might have been indulgence to one person and necessity to another. Fried cakes could mean joy for a child, but survival for a traveler. The debate continues. Were medieval snacks luxuries of abundance or clever adaptations to hunger? The answer may be both, because pleasure and necessity often overlap. You think back to the market's chaos, the cries of vendors, the crunch of wafers, the burn of garlic, the sweetness of figs. None of it feels distant. Instead, it feels oddly modern, like walking through a fairground or a festival today. Human cravings have not shifted so much. We still want quick bites, crispy edges, sticky centers, salt on our tongues, sugar in our teeth. We still laugh over food too hot, still barter coins for pleasure, still treat snacks as comfort when life feels heavy. Joke 1. If you time traveled with a bag of potato chips, a medieval vendor would probably try to pass them off as crispy wafers of St. Crispin. Joke 2. If garlic breath was protection against demons, then maybe pizza breath is our modern shield. Joke 3. Medieval pie vendors bragged about their fillings, and nothing has changed. You still ask, "What's in this?" with mild suspicion. The night grows quieter as you picture the long line of continuity. A fritter leads to a donut. A candied nut leads to a caramel bar. A spiced pie leads to fast food handheld meals. What began in smoky stalls and crowded fairs has stretched across centuries, reshaped, but still recognizable. It is both humbling and amusing. The medieval world feels distant in its poverty, its faith, its fear of sin. And yet, in the crunch of a snack, in the laughter of eating something messy, it feels close, almost familiar. You step into the empty street now, the market gone, the voices faded. Only the echoes of taste remain, carried forward in your mind and strangely, in your own pantry. To think that when you open a bag of candy, when you grab a slice of pie, when you fry something late at night, you are walking the same path as the townsfolk you imagined tonight. They too craved sweetness, crunch, grease, and spice. They too laughed and burned their tongues. They too ignored the preachers for one more bite. And so the journey closes. From bread with salt to sugared trifles, from fish pies to herbal comfits, you have seen how ordinary cravings shape extraordinary traditions. Medieval junk food is not gone. It lives on, reshaped, reborn, and still beloved. Now the torches fade, and the streets lie empty. The laughter of vendors and the shouts of children have gone quiet, leaving only the soft whisper of the night wind against stone walls. You stand still, breathing slowly, letting the memories of flavor drift like smoke until they soften, blur, and dissolve into calm. The harsh salt of herring, the sticky sweetness of honey, the crunch of nuts, the warm chew of fritters, all of it lingers faintly, then fades. What was sharp becomes smooth. What was noisy becomes gentle. The market that once overwhelmed now lies still in your imagination, hushed and calm. Your body feels heavy now, your breath slower. The weight of bread and cheese, the richness of pies, the brightness of fruit. These are no longer meals, but echoes. They drift away like ripples on water, leaving only a quiet surface. You are safe, comfortable, unhurried, no longer jostling through crowds or reaching for coins. You are simply here, resting in the glow of memory. Let the edges of the world soften. Let the hum of your thoughts grow slower, like the stalls closing one by one. The square empties, the torches gutter, the scents fade. What remains is stillness, a quiet space where nothing demands, nothing shouts, nothing tempts. Only calm, only rest. Close your eyes now. Feel the quiet deepen. Let the last sweetness dissolve from your tongue, leaving only ease. The journey through medieval cravings is complete, and your place here is steady, peaceful, and warm. Sleep will come easily now, carrying you into silence, carrying you into dreams, carrying you forward with calm.